All right, so today we are going like head first into autism research.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, we're going to be unpacking some pretty interesting stuff from an article.
Okay.
And the article's by Dr. Jaime Hoerricks called
Yeah, okay.
Episode 70.pdf, Research or Reinforcement, a step-by-step critique of autism research.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, but the cool thing about this is it's written like one of those get ready with me posts that you see online.
Interesting.
I thought that was super creative, you know?
Uh-huh.
Dr. Hoerricks is really taking academic critique and making it relatable, even fun.
Yeah, it's definitely a fresh take on it.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, we often hear about new research findings, but this deep dive kind of takes you behind the scenes.
No, I like that.
We're going to be looking at how the research itself is designed
Okay.
and how those choices impact what we think we know about autism.
I'm already hooked, so what is this study all about?
Well, Dr. Hoerricks is dissecting a study that looks at an emotional recognition memory training program, or ERMTP for short, for autistic children.
Gotcha.
It claims to improve how children understand and react to emotions.
Okay, so that sounds like a positive goal.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the problem?
Well, think of it this way.
Okay.
Imagine you're learning to shoot a bow and arrow.
Okay.
You might be hitting the same spot on the target every time,
Right.
which seems pretty consistent,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
But what if you're consistently hitting the outer ring and not the bullseye?
Ah, I see what you're getting at. So
Yeah.
it's not just about doing something consistently. It's
No.
about whether you're doing the right thing in the first place.
Exactly, and that's where this ERMTP study raises some red flags.
Oh.
Dr. Hoerricks argues that the study's design makes it really hard to tell if it's actually helping autistic children
Okay.
or just encouraging them to mask their true selves to kind of fit in.
Massing. Can you explain what that means for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term?
Sure, masking is when autistic individuals suppress their natural behaviors and try to appear more neurotypical.
Gotcha.
It can be a way of navigating a world that often misunderstands or misjudges autistic traits.
Right.
But it can also be incredibly draining and have negative long-term consequences.
Wow. So instead of celebrating the unique ways autistic individuals experience and interact with the world,
Yeah.
this program might be pushing them to conform to societal expectations.
That's a key concern that Dr. Hoerricks raises.
Yeah.
And it gets even more complicated when we consider the study's small sample size.
How small are we talking?
They only looked at 10 children,
Wow.
5 autistic and 5 non-autistic children.
Okay.
Plus, the study was conducted in Thailand, where cultural norms around autism can influence how parents
Right.
perceive and report their child's progress.
For sure. So we have a tiny sample size,
Yeah.
a specific cultural context,
Hmm.
and concerns about the program promoting masking instead of genuine support.
Exactly.
What else did Dr. Hoerricks find problematic about this study?
Well, the study didn't use a control group or random assignment. That means it's nearly impossible to tell if any improvements seen were actually due to the program itself or just natural development.
It seems like the researchers might be jumping to conclusions based on pretty weak evidence.
That's a very good point. And when you added those concerns about parent reports potentially being influenced by cultural pressures,
Yeah.
it raises serious questions about whether the study's findings are even reliable.
This is already making me rethink how I approach research findings. So far, we've uncovered potential problems with the study's sample size, cultural context, and lack of a control group.
It's a lot to unpack.
This is fascinating, but I have a feeling there's more to this story.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
In fact, one of the biggest issues Dr. Hoerricks raises is that this study uses a deficit-based model.
Okay, I've heard that term before. Can you break it down for our listeners?
Basically, a deficit-based model views autism as something that needs to be fixed or cured.
Okay.
It focuses on what autistic individuals supposedly lack, compared to non-autistic people, rather than appreciating their unique strengths and perspectives.
So instead of trying to make autistic children fit a neurotypical mold,
Yeah.
maybe we should be focusing on creating environments where they can thrive as they are.
That's the heart of the neurodiversity movement,
Okay.
which challenges the idea that there's one right way to think, learn, and interact with the
I
world.
love that.
And that brings us back to those alternative frameworks Dr. Hoerricks mentioned,
Okay.
like the Power Threat Meaning Framework, or PTMF,
Mhm.
and critical theory.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear more about those.
Yeah.
Can you unpack them a bit further for us?
Sure.
But first, let's take a quick moment to thank our sponsors.
These thank you sponsors.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with more of The Deep Dive.
More to come. It's like we're looking at two completely different maps of the same territory.
Okay.
The deficit-based model just wants to kind of smooth out all the unique contours and landmarks,
Yeah.
while PTMF and critical theory say, hey, these variations are what make the landscape interesting.
I love that.
They encourage us to think about how societal power structures and expectations might actually be contributing to the challenges that autistic individuals face,
Okay.
rather than looking at autism itself as the problem.
That's a really powerful shift in perspective.
Yeah.
So how do these frameworks actually apply to the ERMTP study
Right.
and its goal of teaching emotional recognition?
Well, they raise some really important questions.
Look.
Like, for example, whose emotions are actually being prioritized? Are autistic children being taught to recognize and respond to emotions in a way that aligns with neurotypical norms?
Right.
Even if it doesn't feel authentic to their own experiences.
And could that pressure to conform actually end up being harmful?
Yeah.
Especially for those who might already be struggling to navigate social situations.
Exactly. And remember, masking can have serious long-term consequences.
Right. We talked about that.
Like increased anxiety, depression, and even a loss of identity.
Wow.
So even if the ERMTP program shows some initial improvements in emotional recognition, we have to ask ourselves, at what cost?
This deep dive is really making me think about the potential unintended consequences of interventions that are framed as helpful.
Right.
It's like we're peeling back layers of complexity that we might not see at first glance.
That's the power of critical analysis, and Dr. Hoerricks goes even deeper, pointing out a significant problem with the study's claim that the ERMTP is valid. They achieved perfect item objective congruence, or IOC scores.
Right.
But what does that really mean?
I'm honestly a little lost on that one.
Okay, well, imagine you're baking a cake.
Okay.
You follow the recipe perfectly, measuring each ingredient with precision.
Gotcha.
But when you take it out of the oven, it's completely flat and tastes awful.
Oh, no.
You achieved perfect recipe adherence, but you didn't actually bake a good cake.
Okay, get it. Just because something aligns with its intended goal on paper doesn't mean it's actually effective or meaningful in real life?
Precisely. And remember, this study relies heavily on parent reports to assess the program's effectiveness. But those reports can be subjective and influenced by a host of factors, including cultural pressures to show progress.
So we're back to those concerns about cultural context and potential bias in the data.
Right, and this all ties back to the issue of generalizability. Can we really apply the findings of this small-scale study with its methodological flaws and cultural limitations to the broader autistic population?
I have a feeling you're going to say no.
It's tough.
But why is generalizability such a big deal? Especially when it comes to research on something as complex as autism.
Well, autism is a spectrum. Meaning it presents differently in every single individual. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to understanding or supporting autistic people. So a study that focuses on a small, homogeneous group of children in a specific cultural context can't really tell us that much about the needs and experiences of autistic individuals as a whole.
This is reminding me of that saying. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person.
I love that.
It's about recognizing that individual experiences vary widely.
For sure.
That we can't make sweeping generalizations.
Absolutely. And that's why Dr. Hoerricks advocates for a shift in focus. Instead of trying to fix autistic individuals or make them fit neurotypical norms. Research should prioritize understanding and celebrating neurodiversity.
So how do we move away from this deficit-based model that seems so ingrained in how we think about autism?
It starts with listening to autistic voices, including autistic researchers and self-advocates in the research process is crucial.
For sure.
And we need to broaden our understanding of what constitutes success or progress. It's not about forcing autistic individuals to conform, but about creating environments where they can actually thrive as they are.
This deep dive has been incredibly thought-provoking.
I'm so glad.
We've uncovered so many layers of complexity in just this one study. And it's clear that we need to be much more critical of research claims, especially when it comes to a topic as nuanced as autism.
You're absolutely right. And it's not just about critiquing individual studies, but about asking bigger questions about how we as a society view and treat autistic individuals.
We've talked a lot about the problems with this particular study, But are there any takeaways for our listener that might help them evaluate other research they encounter?
Ooh, that's a good question.
What are some key red flags to watch out for?
Well, one of the first things to look at is the sample size.
Okay.
It's a study based on a large and diverse group of people or just a small handful?
Right, like with that ERMTP study, the sample size was so small.
Exactly.
It's hard to know if the results would even apply to anyone outside of that specific group of children.
And it's also worth looking at where the research was conducted and who funded it.
Okay.
Could there be any cultural biases or conflicts of interest that might influence the findings?
That's a good point. We talked about how cultural norms in Thailand might have influenced how parents perceived and reported their children's progress in that ERMTP study.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if the results would have been different if the study had been done somewhere else.
Absolutely. Another important factor is whether the study used a control group
Okay.
and random assignment.
Gotcha.
That's really the gold standard for figuring out if an intervention is truly effective.
Okay.
If a study doesn't have those elements, it's much harder to tell if any observed changes are due to the intervention itself or something else entirely.
So those are some things to look for in terms of the study's design.
Uh-huh.
What about the conclusions the researchers draw?
Well, be wary of studies that make sweeping generalizations
Okay.
or claims that seem too good to be true.
Right.
And pay attention to the language that's being used.
What?
Are the researchers focusing on deficits or strengths?
Okay.
Are they framing autism as a problems to be solved or a different way of being?
This deep dive has really shifted my perspective on how I think about and evaluate research,
Good.
especially when it comes to autism.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a much better understanding of the potential pitfalls and the importance of looking beyond the surface level.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, me too. And remember, it's okay to be skeptical.
Please be skeptical.
If something doesn't sit right with you, dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
Read critiques. Seek out diverse perspectives, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Exactly.
There are so many incredible resources available online and through organizations like the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network.
Such a good one.
You know, one thing that really struck me about Dr. Hoerricks' article was that it wasn't just about critiquing a single study.
Yeah.
It was about challenging the entire framework of how we view and understand autism.
That's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah.
Dr. Hoerricks is inviting us to rethink our assumptions and embrace a more inclusive and celebratory approach to neurodiversity.
Instead of trying to fit square pegs into round holes,
Totally.
we need to build a world where everyone's unique shape is valued and appreciated.
Yes.
And that starts with shifting our focus from fixing autistic individuals to understanding and supporting them.
That's beautifully put.
Thank you.
And it's a message we need to keep amplifying.
For sure.
The more we understand about autism, the more we understand about ourselves and the richness of human experience.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a few key takeaways.
Awesome.
First, remember that research is a process, not a destination. It's about constantly questioning, refining, and evolving our understanding.
Absolutely.
And second, never underestimate the power of critical thinking.
Please.
Don't just accept research findings at face value.
Yeah.
Dig deeper, ask questions, and challenge assumptions. And finally, remember that the most valuable insights often come from listening to the lived experiences of autistic individuals themselves.
Yes, 100%.
Center those voices, amplify those perspectives, and together, let's create a world that embraces neurodiversity in all its forms.
Beautiful.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And remember, knowledge is power, especially when it's used to promote understanding, empathy, and positive change.